talk about Jesus having to escape into and out of Egypt. These are all things that are prophesied in the Old Testament, and the readers would have been familiar with these things. In fact, the first 2 chapters of Matthew really should be subtitled, "People, listen up, pay attention. I'm about to tell you about this guy, Jesus of Nazareth, and he's ticking an awful lot of boxes." What I personally find more interesting than some of the prophecies Jesus is fulfilling as a young child or through his birth is actually later in his life during his ministry and towards his death, those prophecies. But to talk about that, we first have to talk about Neo from The Matrix. And I could have picked a lot of different movies or books or video games, because the fact is, while Western culture sometimes seems antagonistic towards our faith, they certainly embrace the idea of the messianic prophecy. They love that story, the story of the boy wizard with the scar on his forehead who will grow up to ultimately defeat evil. The story of the boy born half Stark, half Targaryen, if you're into Game of Thrones. I chose The Matrix because hopefully by now most of us have seen this movie, and because they lay it on awful thick. In The Matrix, mankind is enslaved to machines and robots, and there's a prophecy, one day one will come about to free them. And in this movie, Neo is the main character, and it's thought that maybe he's the one. We're not really sure. He's not really sure. That's actually what the most engaging part of the movie is, besides the cool martial arts and the special effects for its time. It's, is he or isn't he this person that was prophesied about? He's not sure. He asks somebody who thinks he might be this person. He says, "Are you telling me that if I'm the one, I'll be able to dodge bullets? Because in this universe, more powerful people can dodge bullets." And the response he gets back is, "I'm saying when you're ready, you won't have to." Super cryptic. We as the viewers, we don't know what that means. At the end of the movie, Neo has been shot dead. The people who believed in him are sad. How could our one be dead? And then Neo rises from the dead. Again, they are laying it on awful thick here. Okay? And a bunch of bad guys shoot at him, bullets whirling through the air. And instead of getting hit by the bullets, instead of dodging them, he holds up his hand and he says, "No." And all the bullets stop midair and crash to the ground. And it's super satisfying because as a viewer, we not only know that he's the one, we are let in on the secret of what that prophecy meant. You won't, when you're ready, you won't have to dodge bullets. We get it. And that is a satisfying feeling. It's why we like movies with twist endings, or even movies that just have endings where at the end, it all puts it into context. We watch the movie and now we're in on the secret. We're in the know. We have the whole story in its proper context. I like these movies so much, I like to rewatch them with people who've never seen it, just so as they get more and more confused, I'm smiling because I know what's going on. It's a satisfying feeling. That feeling of everything will make sense at the end sometimes colors our perception of how Jesus is going about fulfilling some of the prophecies later in his life. We read that Jesus speaks in parables. And then later we're reading Psalm 78 and it says, "I will speak in parable." Aha! I get it. My favorite example on this Palm Sunday is Jesus rides into Jerusalem triumphantly on a donkey. And maybe we read that when we were young, 9 years old, and it doesn't make a lot of sense. Why is he riding in on a donkey? And then 20 years later in a Bible study, we're reading Zechariah 9:9, and it says, "Rejoice," I'm paraphrasing, "Rejoice, O Israel, rejoice, Jerusalem, for here comes your king riding lowly on a donkey." Aha, I get it. I'm in the know, I understand. We might even look at this from a sense of apologetics. This proves it. He must be the Messiah. How could Zechariah have known this was going to happen hundreds of years ago? I've heard both these perspectives. Neither of them are wrong. What I'm suggesting is it's much simpler than that. Jesus had also read Zechariah 9:9. Said the Messiah was supposed to ride in on a donkey. He knew he was the Messiah, so he might have looked at two people and said, "Hey, go get me a donkey. I'm about to ride into Jerusalem." These characters we read about in Neo, Harry Potter, yada yada, they don't know who they are, and they don't know what they're on earth to do. Jesus Christ is wholly different. He knows exactly who he is, what his purpose is, why he's on earth, and what he's there to accomplish. He's not some leaf blowing around in the winds of destiny, just accidentally fulfilling prophecy. He didn't accidentally get on a donkey so that way it would prove that he was the Messiah years later. And he didn't even purposely get on it so you, scouring the ancient text, come upon Zechariah 9:9 and finally are able to put it in perspective because you're this detective. No, it was much simpler. He knew the Messiah was supposed to do it, so he did it. He was purposely fulfilling prophecy, or another way to say this is, he is purposely or intentionally doing the will of God, doing God's work on this world. If we are to be Christ-like, we are to be intentionally doing God's work in this world, intentionally filling his prophecy. God has prophecies for us all the time. God tells us to be somewhere, to go do something. He's saying, I've got something for you there. I need you to go. And if we fall too much in love with this idea of it all makes sense at the end, then here's what it looks like. God says, I need you to be somewhere, whether it be in an attitude, spiritually, or maybe physically. I need you to move geographically to this location. And we say, God, your wish is my command. And I'm going to sit here, and one day I'll die, and it's going to be so moving when I figure out how you miracled me from where I'm at to where you want me to be. And that's not, and I don't want anybody to misunderstand me. There's things that will become clear, I'm sure, when we die, ways that we are working to move God's kingdom, advance God's kingdom that we didn't know. But when God tells you to do something, we are to be Christ-like and to be intentional about doing it. So if Christ is intentionally fulfilling prophecy where he can, like riding on a donkey, and unintentionally fulfilling prophecy, things like a virgin birth, why is it people don't recognize him as the Messiah? Even his closest followers, the disciples, there's this story where they're in a boat and there's a storm and the winds and waves are blowing and the disciples are terrified and they're afraid they're going to be tossed into the sea, and Jesus says, oh, ye of little faith, and he stands up, and I like how it's said in the NIV, and he rebukes the wind and the waves. And the disciples say, who is this man? Which it's like, really? I mean, you've now seen him do the Sermon on the Mount. You've seen him heal a leper. You've seen him heal the paralyzed soldier. You've seen him raise the widow's dead son from death. He has now quite literally told the storm to calm down, and you don't get it. Who is this man? Even the wind and waves obey him. If they couldn't see him as the Messiah just yet, you can't really blame people who weren't that close to Jesus for not understanding that he was the Messiah. Some people would tell you it's because it was a lack of faith. I think that's a misread. I think a lot of the Jews of Jesus' day were very faithful. They followed Jewish law. They followed the Sabbath. They ate kosher. Some people would tell you it's because of the expectation of what a king was going to be, and Jesus didn't meet that expectation. That gets a lot closer, but it's still just a symptom of a much bigger problem that we're still wrestling with in humanity today. And that is, we have a tendency to allow our expectation of what God's work is supposed to look like in this world blind us to what God's work actually looks like in this world. Or on the flip side of the coin, we let our definition of success blind us to what God's definition of success is, which is how we get to one of the most ironic and saddest parts of human history, Christ being nailed to a cross, and on it is written, King of the Jews, sarcastically. Someone has taken the time, have you ever thought about this? They didn't just find a crown of thorns. Someone has taken the time to weave a crown of thorns as a sick burn and put on his head, sarcastically, King of the Jews. He can't be a king. Pilate's soldiers are beating him, calling him King of the Jews. The people are laughing. Many of the people would have been Jewish. They believed that there would be a Messiah. They just didn't believe he was. And don't let this be lost on you. When they're making fun of him for not being a king of the Jews, that's a very specific phrase. It means Messiah. They're making fun of him for not being the chosen one, for not being the anointed one. As we go into Good Friday, a lot of times we spend some time in reflection and thinking of the tragedy of the crucifixion. But we think of it through the tragedy of Christ's eyes. Beaten, tortured, mocked by the people he came to save, calling out to God. But maybe this week we think of it from the tragedy of the people there, doing the mocking, doing the beating. Because I think their story is super sad, because they're missing it. They're letting the expectation of what God's work is supposed to look like in this world blind them to one of the greatest thing God ever did in this world, and they're missing it. And they have a front row seat to it. They have let their definition of success, a king that releases them from the bondage of Roman oppression, blind them to a wholly more powerful, way more powerful version of success, a definition of success, a king that releases them from the bondage of sin. And they have a front row seat to it, and they're missing it. They're walking through the Sistine Chapel while Michelangelo's painting and forgetting to look up. And I think it's heartbreaking. And we should focus on those people because they could be us and we could be them. We still do this. We allow our definitions of success, money, image, status, interfere with what God's definition of success is. We even do this when we're trying to do God's work. God tells you, I want you to go have a conversation with a neighbor. So on the walk over to the neighbor's house, we get excited. We have an idea of what that's going to look like. I'm going to tell him about my church, and he's going to fall down on his knees. He's going to cry out for God. He's going to name his first child after me, and we're going to go on family vacations for the rest of our lives. And then that doesn't happen. And in our walk back, we think, that wasn't a success. Maybe that wasn't even what God wanted for me. So we close out today. I was thinking a lot about people of presence. That's what this series has been about. It's not people who are present. People who are present are just people who happen to be somewhere. There's nothing impressive about people who are present. A people of presence are people who are there with intentionality and a mindset. So when God calls you to go somewhere, to be somewhere, we're to be Christ-like, not just wait around for him to miracle us over there. We're to be Christ-like and intentional about fulfilling that. And then when we get there, we need to have a mindset that says, God, it's your definition of success, not mine, that's going to rule this world. And I'm not going to allow my expectation of what your work looks like in this world blind me to the great works you're already doing all over this world. Thank you so much for your time. God bless.
As we watch these heavy pieces of equipment, we see a cornfield being transformed into 5 acres of green space. That's what we see happening in the moment. But if you're a new starter, you see so much more than a cornfield, heavy equipment, and dirt. We see 22 kids playing a soccer match, and some of these kids are in need of a mentor. We see a couple on the verge of divorce coming out to play in a sand volleyball outing where they will end up meeting a new start couple who are marriage coaches and will help bring healing to their marriage. We see 5 acres where people who have a love for Jesus, a love for the church, and a love for recreation and sports who will turn 5 acres of grass into 5 acres of a relational harvest field. When I watch this field be transformed, I see the next 100 people coming to Jesus Christ, being baptized and discipled through the people of New Start. Friends, one thing we've recently been made aware of as a culture is we need each other. Our time together in person, our worship gatherings, and our activities are some of the ways God feeds our souls and where we can encourage each other. Social distancing through April is a tree on which we can get our focus stuck. But this field is the force where our focus can turn. It represents for us the harvest field of Delaware County. God has placed us here for so much good to be done and for the gospel to be shared. Your continued faithfulness in your tithes and offerings are what is transforming a cornfield into a spiritual harvest field. We may not hang out together in April, and who knows, social distancing could even get moved into May. But this is just a bump in the field to be flattened. Let's keep our eyes on a summer of relationship building and leading people to the grace and forgiveness of Jesus Christ. For in Him is where our joy and our hope lie.